The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
I am sure you've heard this before. What do they call the person who finishes last in his or her medical school class? Doctor. Right. You're still doctor. You may have finished last, but nobody sees your grades when they go in to see you for whatever specialty that you're in. I don't know if this is apples to apples, but, the Commanders didn't play very well yesterday. They were terrible. They didn't turn the ball over, and they got out of Atlanta against a team that was intent on killing itself with a win. And at 3-3, they are off to their best start since Ron Rivera took over before the 2020 season. Okay, it's nothing to throw a parade about. And the schedule from here, well, we'll get into that. But, it's a long way from the playoffs, but they haven't played themselves out of it, as it looks like the Giants have now at 1-5, and the Patriots have now at 1-5. And over the next 3 weeks, they're going to see both of those teams with the Eagles in between. And the Eagles yesterday looked bad. They lost at New York against the Jets. Jalen Hurts threw 3 interceptions. The last one was a backbreaker. It allowed the Jets to get the go-ahead touchdown and win the game. So, are they good? Are they good enough to make the playoffs? We'll see. But they're not bad. And I think the most important thing that we're seeing over these first 6 games is Sam Howell might be the guy. Look, he's got 34 sacks. He's almost halfway to the record, which is held by David Carr, who took 76 sacks in the first year of the Houston Texans, when they came in as an expansion team in 2003. This is nothing to write home about on the sacks either, but he did not turn the ball over yesterday. And the Falcons turned the ball over 3 times, and Washington won the game. I like the comment that Barry Zerluga has in his column today about Sam Howell. He says, so far, I would argue it's more likely the Commanders have their guy than they don't. And his column is all about the comparison between Howell and Desmond Ridder, who was taken 2 rounds above him in the 2022 draft. And the Falcons are investing in him in the same way that Washington is investing in Howell. And based on their head-to-head matchup yesterday, you probably like Howell at this point. Now, does he have a lot to prove still? Absolutely. He's played 7 games in the NFL. And, a lot can happen over the last 11 that they have. But I would say this. If you'd have told me that Sam Howell would have performed like this over the first 6 games of the season, I would say I would take it, because you knew he was going to be up and down. All this offseason nonsense about, Tom Brady was drafted in the 6th round. And no, Tom Brady's one of a kind. He's a unicorn. The ups and the downs that go with being a rookie quarterback are things that you just have to live with. And even the greats of all time have had starts that are similar to this. I'm not in any way comparing Sam Howell to the greats of all time. But, John Elway struggled early on with the Denver Broncos. Peyton Manning threw, 28 interceptions in his rookie year? You got to live with these things. And they're living with a guy who's a sack machine. And, the way he takes these sacks, he does seem to be able to protect himself. And it's remarkable with 34 sacks through 6 games that we haven't heard anything about an injury. Not even an injury that might keep him out of a day or 2 of practice. So on the whole, yeah, you got to feel like, okay, not cause for great celebration. You don't proclaim to the world, we found our guy, but they're on their way to doing this. Now, as for the game, I think Ron Rivera summed it up very well.
An ugly road win. I think one of the things that really stood out more so than anything else was we protected the football and we took the football away. That gave us the opportunity more so than anything else. Some things that we still got to continue to work on and improve, some of the details. We weren't as good as we needed to be. We did our job, but we got to pay even more attention to the details because we almost got ourselves in trouble.
Yeah, of course. And you are going to do that when your quarterback takes that many sacks. And your defense, while it was better yesterday than it was against the Bears, it still had some problems. And I was amazed to look at this stat after the game that Atlanta was 5 of 15 on third downs, because in the early part of the game, they were converting one third down after another. This looked like the repeat of the Chicago game where they were just moving the ball down the field. Big third down conversions. And, in fact, I thought, at one point that was going to be the backbreaker for them, that once again the defense asked to make big stops, couldn't do it. Now, I think one of the things that helped was Emmanuel Forbes didn't play, didn't take a single snap at corner after getting absolutely toasted the last 2 weeks. So that was helpful. But you also got to look at the overall numbers. Yards passing for Atlanta, almost 300. 296 yards passing. For the game, they had 402 yards. They held the ball for 36 minutes. Washington held it for less than 24, but it all goes back to those turnovers and to get the 3 that they had, the game-sealing one by Jamin Davis at the end, and Benjamin St. Juste. And this is going to be a meme. Arthur Smith, whose operation for play calling is a complete freaking disaster. They got back-to-back delay of game penalties because they couldn't get a play in. They had to burn a timeout to get a play in, and the play that results is an interception in the end zone by St. Juste, the first of his career. And it's going to be a meme all over the NFL as Arthur Smith, with that funky mustache he's got, throwing his hands over his head like, "Oi, Gavalt! Ay, ay, ay! Look at what we just did." And whether that's going to pave the way for Desmond Ridder to lose his job, I don't know. But if you're doing sports talk radio in Atlanta today, you're killing Desmond Ridder, and you're wondering what the hell's going on. This was more from Rivera, the good and the bad that he saw from Sam Howell yesterday.
Well, I thought there's some real good things that Sam did early on, and I think it's one of those things that, again, he's got to continue to work on getting the ball out, get the ball out on time. He can't set himself up to take those kind of sacks sometimes, and those are probably the only real big negatives I could see. He did speed his clock up a little bit later in the fourth quarter, if you ask me. And again, I got to look at the tape before I can really give you a definitive on that. But it did look like he sped up his clock a little bit and threw the ball sometimes before he needed to.
Especially early on. I mean, that was really one thing that was encouraging. The way they came out running their offense, it looked crisp. Howell was getting the ball out. It kind of fell off in the second half, and in that fourth quarter, some really bizarre play calling, including that 14-second drive that they had at the end with the lead trying to kill the clock. But the way that they approached this game was so much better. It was much crisper. The offense looked a lot better than it has. I mean, it's gonna go back. I mean, they're going to make adjustments for them, and you're going to see games that are going to resemble the Bears as we go through this. It's kind of the process that you have to live with Sam Howell. But I'm right with Rivera on this, on the 6-game sample of this season that we've seen so far with Howell as the starting quarterback.
I think a guy is in growth and development, and again, as he grows and develops and continues to do positive things, it gives us every opportunity to be even better as a football team. When we make mistakes and we don't do things we're capable of, we're not as good as we can be. I think his growth is going to be real important, real critical to us as we continue to go forward.
No, I think the growth of Sam Howell this year is critical for really the next decade. If over the last 11 games of the season, they see enough that this guy can be, is he going to be an elite quarterback? Probably not. But is he going to be good enough so that you're competitive, that you're playing for the playoffs, and in 2 years, or really probably a year from now, you make a decision on whether to invest in him long term? He is a really cheap option right now. He's playing on a rookie contract, which has all of this year to go and 2 more years. And he's making, I think, less than $1 million this year, and it maybe tops out at $2 or $3 million. I mean, it's ridiculously cheap to have this Sam Howell experiment going. So while you do that, you see what you got, and you find out what's going to be available in the draft. There's a lot of guys, coming out this year who are going to be highly drafted. And, along the way, you may do what Tennessee did. Not that Tennessee is a shining example of what you can be in this league, but they have been a playoff team a couple of times with Ryan Tannehill, who was a discard from Miami, and he was taken in the same draft as Kirk Cousins and Robert Griffin III, and he's still playing. He's playing at a decent level. Maybe you find a guy like that, or maybe Howell develops into somebody like that, but you keep swinging, and maybe along the way you're going to find that guy. But I would say that through 6 games, you don't have to abandon ship right now. You've got a guy who, as Barry puts it so well, looks like more their guy than not. Or that's not his words. He says he would argue it's more likely the Commanders have their guy than they don't, and I think that's pretty much the case. Now, this is Howell on the sacks, and you got to remember this. When you're on your way to an NFL record sack total, which is 76, so through 6 games, he's almost halfway there, you can't be throwing your offensive lineman under the bus. Not that the offensive line is terrible, but it's not that great. And yesterday, this is really tragic, Charles Leno missed the game because his wife gave birth to a stillborn baby. Really awful news, and it broke yesterday morning, and that was the family reason that he wasn't there. But they got enough out of the offensive line to win the game. But again, 5 sacks. So when Howell discusses the sacks, he can't be saying, "Hey, I'm running for my life out there." He's got to take the blame for it, and I think that he definitely did that. Discussing his 5-sack performance yesterday.
I think a lot of those sacks were more coverage sacks, and when it's a coverage sack, it's on me, and I got to find a way to, either try to take a short completion or find an incompletion. I thought they did a good job kind of covering the checkdowns and taking those short completions away, and kind of made it tough on me to find an incompletion. But that's just something I got to continue to get better at. But those guys up front did a heck of a job, and they fought till the end.
Yeah, so you got to compliment your offensive line. No matter what happens, you have to do that. And he's right. A lot of those are on him, the coverage sacks. Get rid of the ball. That's the one hole he's got in his game right now. And it's probably long-term going to be the thing that if he doesn't fix is going to keep him from being that guy. Probably going to keep him from being the long-term answer at quarterback if he doesn't get that fix. He can, again, Peyton Manning threw 28 interceptions his rookie year. He got that fix. Sam Howell can get the sack total fix, but he's got to learn to get rid of the football. That's what the great ones do. They get to the line, they make their decisions, and they get rid of the ball. He does, though, in defense of what he has done here. The sacks only once this year have resulted in a turnover. That was the strip sack that he had against Arizona in the opener, and he has managed to protect the football, and he has not been throwing interceptions. That's key as well. I mean, he threw 4 of them in that Buffalo game, but he's managed to stay away from that as well. Here's more from Howell.
There's certain situations where maybe finding an incompletion is not as good as taking a sack, especially when you're trying to run some clock out or something like that. But, yeah, just trying to keep 2 hands on the ball in the pocket at all times. I had that one strip sack in the first game, and that's something that really hasn't happened to me much, but it's just been a kind of point of emphasis for me as we've gone throughout the season is take care of the ball. And if, at the end of the day, if you have to take a sack, take the sack. But yeah, that's just something we've been working on.
That may be some coaching he's gotten from the staff that, rather than try and force it. And what we saw last night in the end of that Philadelphia game where Jalen Hurts, I don't know what he was doing, throwing off his back foot into double coverage, which resulted in the Jets nearly getting a pick 6, and it actually set up a touchdown where the Eagles, because of the time situation, were forced to let the Jets score, which they did, and it was really a dumb thing by the Jets to score as quickly as they did because they left time on the clock for Philadelphia to get it done, but he didn't, and Jalen Hurts didn't get it done. So the point he's making is sometimes you take the sack to avoid a bad pass that could result in an interception. And also, if you're looking to run out the clock, rather than have an incompletion that would stop the clock, you take the sack and the clock keeps running. But I think you're playing with fire there because every time you got 2 300-pounders converging on you, there's a possibility, and it could be a fluke thing. It could be you land wrong on your wrist and something happens there, or you get your ribs broken. It's never a good situation, I don't think, for the quarterback to get sacked. He's saying maybe it's better than a bad throw. Maybe. But these are going to add up, and eventually the law of averages is going to kick in, and one of these sacks is going to result in an injury. So 34 sacks through 6 games, 5 a game. That's a lot. That's a lot of sacks, and he had 5 more yesterday, and that's something that I'm sure is being addressed and needs to be fixed. We'll hear a little bit later on in the show from Jamin Davis, who had the game-sealing interception, also more from Howell and Rivera. This was Benjamin St. Juste, who had a conversation with J.P. Finley of NBC4, and it was I didn't realize this because he's been playing at a pretty high level for the last couple of years, but this was in fact St. Juste's first interception of his career, and it came at an enormous time with Atlanta knocking on the door with the possibility of tying the game on a 3rd and 7, and he just found himself wide open in the end zone for the pick.
Feeling great, honestly, because I know they come in bunches. So once you get one after that, it's kind of like it's going to come every game. I'm going to be chasing that ball. So great feeling, great win. And honestly, I think the work that we put in practice, like we was hungry for this. We worked on the details, stayed disciplined, and I think it showed today.
The coaches really made a point of talking about do your job over the past week. How did you take that personally?
Honestly, I just, whenever it was my time to make a play, like I would try to show up as much as possible. I didn't try to make somebody else's job. I didn't try to look for a play. Whenever the play came my way, I try to make it. And I think that's the attitude we need to have. All 11 players on the defense doing your job. Because he said, the play doesn't care who makes it. Somebody's got to make it. So if you're doing your job, it'll come your way. If you're trying to do somebody else's job, then you leave your assignment, they're going to come your way.
What's it mean for you guys in the defense when you are generating turnovers and then the offense goes and gets points right off it?
It's a team that creates that wins a turnover battle that will win. I think the past weeks we couldn't generate turnovers and stuff because we were maybe not doing our job, maybe not paying attention to details, maybe not being as disciplined as we were today. And I think today we had 3. Yeah. So it's the team that that wins a turnover battle that will eventually win the game. I think it's like a stat that said 75% chance of winning the game if you win a turnover battle.
I bet you guys this season the stats would bear it out too. Just through 6 games. Through 6 games, you got the Giants now, another NFC East game. How do you feel about this team?
I feel great. I think this was a stepping stone. I think this was the standard of how we need to play on the defensive side. I think we'll carry that. We'll be as hungry as possible throughout the week, trying to make sure that we stick to that standard and rise above that. We're not going back, It's, all that stuff that we did prior to that, we're not going back to that.
Well, you might want to cool your jets a little bit, St. Juste. That's Benjamin St. Juste with J.P. Finley. You gave up over 400 yards, okay? Yeah, you got the turnovers, the 3 of them. You can't count on that week after week. Daniel Jones, if he plays this week, he didn't play last night because of a bad neck. He's crushed them in the past, so you got to be aware of that. You don't want numbers like that. You don't want to give up almost 300 yards passing and a total of 400 yards and allow Atlanta to hold the ball for as long as they did. If you can get that many turnovers in a game, and that was a point of emphasis going into the season, get more turnovers. That's why they drafted Emmanuel Forbes in the first round, and Forbes is now on the bench because he hasn't been able to cover the last 2 weeks. If you can get the turnovers, great, but you can't count on that every week. You got to make more stops, and you got to play overall, I think, better defensively. But got the job done yesterday. Ugly road win, as Ron Rivera called it, 24-16 over the Falcons, and they are slight favorites going into New York next week to play the Giants. Coming up in the next hour, much more on the Commanders' win yesterday, and 40 years ago today, the Orioles won the World Series, erasing a memory that had occurred October 16th, 14 years earlier. That was not good. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. If you're just jumping in your car, I ran through several obits that I found to be interesting. Suzanne Summers, as you know, passed away, and a man by the name of Charles Feeney, who passed away at 92, gave away his $8 billion fortune before he died and lived the rest of his life in a 2-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. Really remarkable. Also passing away recently, Rudolph Isley of the famed Isley Brothers. And this surprised me. Most people know that the Isley Brothers did the song Shout. And Shout is probably the signature song of one of the most amazing movies ever made. It couldn't make it today because of all the politically incorrect things that are part of it. But Animal House made John Belushi a movie star. and was, for many of us who were in college at the time, like the Touchstone movie. Like, oh, wow, look at that. And so when they do the toga party and they perform in the basement of the frat house, the song Shout, it's great. And nowadays they play it at bar mitzvahs and weddings, and a lot of people mimic some of the things that the people did in Animal House, like laying down on the floor and jumping up. And this is what surprised me about the song. It peaked at 47 on the Billboard chart. Now, you'd think a song like that would have been a major hit when they chose it for Animal House, but they just made it work. And so the popularity of that song, which came out in the 1950s, was more so about what they did, almost 30 years later, about 30 years later, 20 years later, whatever it was, over the years. That when you think of that song, Shout, that's the song that you think of. So Rudolph Isley, rest in peace, and thank you for giving us such a great part of the movie Animal House. All right, as for the Commanders, this was the victory speech from Ron Rivera. Now, we've heard a bunch of these over the years, and they're always all positive. This one had a little bit of criticism in it, even though they won the game, even though they won the turnover battle 3-0, which usually gets you a victory. Listen to Ron Rivera kind of be a little critical of his team as he wraps up what is usually a big rah-rah moment after a game.
It was a family win. You talked about the things that everybody needed to do. Offense, defense, special teams. Those are the details that we talked about. All three phases got to contribute. All three phases got to give us the opportunity to win a football game. Guys got to understand one thing. There are no perfect moments. They're just moments. You make those moments perfect. Okay, that's what happens. They're just opportunities, as Coach Rock said. Opportunities. When you take advantage of opportunities, you win football games. It's that simple. Just got to remember a couple things. Y'all did your job, but you got to pay attention to details. We were not detail-oriented today. We got to be detail-oriented. You want to be a great team? Details. Little things add up. Little things become big things become great things. You become champions. That's how it happens. That's just the way life is, guys. That's the process.
You don't really hear that much, right? I don't really remember a speech. Hey, you guys need to pay attention to the details. So that was kind of a different kind of a twist to that. Had some big plays in this game. Obviously, the turnovers played a big role. But this is a team that has not had a punt return for a touchdown since 7 years ago. 7 years was the last time that happened. And Jamison Crowder was the one that did it. And Jamison Crowder disappeared. And might have been 2 games into the season. Certainly it was after the first game. They signed Jamison Crowder, who was, a discard, getting older. And I didn't really think much of it. But Jamison Crowder had one of the key plays in the game. He had a big punt return, which set up a touchdown. They didn't settle for 3 points, which was huge. This is Rivera on what Crowder was able to do relatively early in the game to get them a spark.
That was a really good return. The biggest thing, more so than anything else, was he caught it, and there was enough of a holdup that when he caught it, he was able to drop his eyes down after he had the ball, see the crease, and just exploded through it. He started getting downhill, made a nice cutback, and if we could have just shielded one more guy off, he probably goes the distance on his own. As it is, it was a spark that we needed, and it was very exciting.
Yeah, it set up a touchdown pass that they were able to get late in the second quarter. Curtis Samuel catching with about 5 minutes left before halftime, and that was big. And that's 2 things that happened yesterday: turnovers, which they hadn't been getting, and big returns. Now the kickoff is just about obsolete. Maybe I should look this up. I don't think there's been a kickoff return for a touchdown this year in any game, and I can't remember a significant kickoff. Now that you kick off from the 25-yard line, unless you're trying to create something and you try and pop it up in the air, or late in the game you want to dribble it across the ground, most of these guys can kick it out of the end zone. So kick returners are pretty much useless now. Punt returners, as we saw yesterday, can still play a role. And Jamison Crowder, back on the team, is playing a role. So that's huge. Another thing happened yesterday, defense. They did not – now, they did give up a lot of yards passing. See, lost in the 3 interceptions is this. that they gave up almost 300 yards passing. Atlanta had 296, and for the game, total yards, 402. So that's a lot. But you didn't have what you had the last 2 weeks with Emmanuel Forbes just getting torched. Forbes was not on the field for a single defensive snap yesterday. And the question going forward is, with now you are getting some production out of draft picks, so including Sam Howell, who's in the 5th round. Chase Young played his season high 75 snaps yesterday, although I don't think there's any chance that he's going to be back with the team next year. I think that he's going to be gone, and part of the reason is you see what happens with Casey Toohill, who's an unheralded guy who gets 2 sacks yesterday. You're just not going to pay him to do that. But he's putting pressure on the quarterback. He's doing a good job. But Forbes, as a first-round draft pick, mid-first rounder, and a guy who was brought in specifically for the purpose of getting turnovers, and he has one this year, but you can't play him because right now he can't cover anybody. And they put him on the bench yesterday, didn't play him at all, thinking, okay, maybe give him a week to get his head straight. But as they head into this Giants game on Sunday, doesn't sound like Ron Rivera is moving in the direction of restoring him as they get. Now, injuries may force him back on the field, but as far as getting his job back, doesn't sound like it.
It's probably an opportunity for him to get a little reset, kind of watch, see how things happen, see how things go. And, hopefully it's something that he'll learn from, he'll take as a positive and grow from it.
Very non-committal on that. More good from the game was the way that they came out. The offense looked really crisp, and you saw Howell getting the ball out. He still had 5 sacks for the game, but the offense moved at a different pace at the beginning of the game. And I think what's been key for them over the years is getting Terry McLaurin involved early. And McLaurin had another great game yesterday. He had 6 catches for 81 yards, didn't have a touchdown. Jahan Dotson, who, by the way, was supposed to have a big breakout year, is not. He had 1 target yesterday. He was wide open, and he simply dropped the ball. So that's a concern. But if you can get Terry McLaurin involved, that can really help you. And this was Howell on that for McLaurin to get 6 catches, 81 yards, most of them early, getting the offense clicking. This is how Howell assessed it.
We script, the first 15, we call it, and we script plays, and we know Terry had a good opportunity to, be the primary in a lot of those plays and get the ball. And, we knew we were going to see a lot of man-match type coverage against them, and we know our guys were going to have to win, and Terry's a guy that excels in man coverage. We always want to get Terry going, and we want to get everybody going. Just talking to the guys, man, there was a lot of, I don't think Curtis and Jahan didn't have very much involvement in the passing game, and that's just something we got to continue to get better at moving forward. And those guys know it's only a matter of time. And at the end of the day, they were happy to win. But Terry did a good job, and all those guys did a good job when their number was called.
Yeah, he was smart to include Dotson in this, but the two of them are not clicking. This is not what we expected, because Dotson, he was hurt last year, and he was the touchdown maker. I think he had 7 touchdowns last year. He's not performing there, so there's a little bit of a disconnect. Samuel 4 for 42. I think they need to run him a little bit more. There were a couple of plays that they worked him in the running game, but he's one of those dual threats that are becoming more and more popular in the game. He only had 1 carry yesterday, so I'd like to see him get a few more. But he did have 4 catches, second leading receiver, and they ran the screen well to Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson had 10 carries yesterday. 10. That is not right. They need to get him the ball, and that drive that they had with about 5 minutes to go when they were up 8 and wanted to take some time off the clock, they come out throwing. It's an incompletion by Howell, stops the clock. They had, I think, 1 run, and then they ran another play with time on the play clock, and that was incomplete. You got to feed the beast. You got to get him going. He's a big, powerful runner, and he doesn't turn the ball over. Yeah, getting him involved in the screen game is good, but 10 carries in a game like that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think Brian Robinson needs to get the ball more. Now, the big story of the week was reporters showing up and seeing signs on the locker room door in Ashburn which said, "Do your job," the old Bill Belichick motto. Well, they did their job yesterday, mostly, and Rivera, as you heard in the post-game speech to the team, talked about the three phases doing their job. But Howell says there's a lot more to it than that.
Everyone's always kind of focused on doing your job, but when he stressed it all week long, do your job. He put signs up around like you guys probably saw, and I just think it kind of makes everyone really lock back in and focus on what is my job, what am I supposed to be doing, how can I contribute to the team, and how can I help this team win football games. And I think everyone fully bought into their role this week as a team, and we were able to get it done. So we just got to continue to get it going moving forward.
How about Jamin Davis? Remember last year he was publicly criticized by Ron Rivera and others on the coaching staff, including the defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio. He hasn't been great, but you get a game like this out of him, you'll take it. And it was the Jamin Davis interception which sealed the game as he stepped in front of Bijan Robinson.
You knew they kept trying to isolate me with 7 because, he's a dangerous guy. He's real shifty. So just trying to anticipate what I knew what was coming, just short down in distance. It was probably going to be a double move or something coming inside and just let instincts take over, I guess.
Yeah, did the job. And if he can continue to play at that level, Ron Rivera is a former linebacker. He's been a linebackers coach. Linebackers don't really figure in what they're doing here. They have a couple of them on the field, but the days of linebackers being a star on this team, they still are in Baltimore. But on this team, that's just not the way they do their defense. It's based on sometimes the 5-man front that they have, and then play in the secondary if it's good enough. And yesterday was a good day for them. But linebackers, not the same as they used to be. The linebackers around here used to be stars, and they had one who was, I think, borderline Hall of Fame, Wilbur Marshall, who was a big part of the Bears Super Bowl championship team in '85 and came here and was a big addition to the team that won the Super Bowl in 1991. They don't really have that now. And for a former first-round pick like Jamin Davis to acquit himself as well as he did yesterday, he also went on a sack. It wasn't, the traditional sack. He forced the runner out of bounds behind the line of scrimmage, so that counts as a sack. But did the job well enough yesterday, and as we go forward, it'll be interesting to watch. I mentioned the schedule a little earlier, just to go over this again. 2 of the next 3 weeks, they're playing teams that are a disaster. And I'll get into more on the Patriots coming up. But, again, they lost yesterday, against another team that was struggling. But they're struggling worse, and they lost yesterday at Las Vegas. They're 1-5, and so are the Giants, who Washington plays next week. They're 2-point favorites going into that. They got the Eagles in between. That's the home game on October 29th, which they have announced as a sellout. But mark my words, it'll be a green sellout because those tickets that have been sold were sold last year. So this is not necessarily in response to the good feelings that have come from this season, the couple of early wins and all the stuff that was done by the new ownership heading into the season. It helps. And that will hopefully help them as they play the other regular season games at home. They got the Giants in Week 11. They got the Dolphins in Week 13, and then home against the 49ers New Year's Eve, and the following week against Dallas. So we'll see how it plays out in those games. But the Eagle game, I'm sure, is going to be primarily an Eagle crowd. But the fact that they got teams 2 of the next 3 weeks who they should beat. So 3-3, and if they lose 1 of the next 3, you're talking about a team that would be 5-4, heading to Seattle and very much in the playoff mix for week number 10. So that's something to keep an eye on. Mention the owners. Just want to throw this in. Mark Ein and Mitchell Rales were in Atlanta yesterday, and they, according to reporters, took about a 30-minute tour of the stadium. Which is significant. This is the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium that was built by Arthur Blank and the Falcons. They've been in that building, 5-6 years, something like that. And it's considered to be one of the premier stadiums in the NFL and has a retractable roof. Is that something that these guys are looking at. They say they were Ein was put out a tweet even saying he was very impressed with it. That's a good sign. Again, I've said this many times. If you're thinking you're going to see a new stadium here in 2-3 years, don't count on it. You're looking at more like 2030 or 2031. But the fact that they're being proactive on this and publicly proactive, they could have had a tour of the stadium on Saturday when nobody was there, but they were there touring the stadium before the game and came away very impressed. But it was a wild college football weekend and really disappointing homecoming for Maryland. We'll talk about that and other college football issues as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We got Tony coming up on this sunny Monday. Looks like this is the last week of pretty good weather. It's supposed to get a little colder next week. Weekends have been, yesterday really didn't matter. It was a nice day, but stayed inside all day to watch football. Saturday was the same as it was the week before. Rain, cold, and looks like we got rain again this Saturday. By the way, I use this term. I was thinking about this. I use this term to describe the weather on Saturday, and I said it was a carbon copy of the Saturday before. And then I got to thinking, carbon copy. How old do you have to be to understand that reference? Because once copiers became common in offices. They were called Xerox machines when they first started, and making copies was kind of expensive. So there was this transition of if you were only making one copy of a letter, you would make a carbon. It was a piece of carbon that would go in between two pieces of paper, and what you typed on the original would go as a copy, which you could keep in a file or however you did your bookkeeping or your filing. And then, of course, when copiers came in, and then, now machines that print out from whatever you type, it doesn't really matter. You don't have that. So to say carbon copy, to get the full understanding of what that means, you probably may have to be close to 60 years old. Just something that popped into my head. I want to spend some more time on the Commanders in the 10 o'clock hour, but throughout the rest of the time here, we got Tony coming up at 11. He may discuss the game as well, but I was just perusing the schedule here. And at 3-3, they're off to their best start under the Ron Rivera era. Usually things really start to crater at this time of the year, and they may still. But I'm just looking ahead. They got the Giants this week. They're favored on the road. The Eagles here, and they've played the Eagles tough. They beat them last year in Philadelphia. And the Eagles, if they play anything like they did yesterday, might be a beatable team there. And then the Patriots, who are an absolute mess. I got some of what Jason Lockenfora wrote about him over the weekend, and now he's throwing down his iPad, whatever they call it, to chart the plays and things like that. Just real frustration as they are 1-5. And then they go to Seattle, okay, but, that's a game that they probably won't win, but they've gone there in the past, and they've had, offensive linemen who they signed that day introducing themselves to Kirk Cousins, and they won the game. I believe that's the last time they played out there. The Giants here, and then here's the part that intrigues me about the finish of the season. Now, the last 4 games are not gimmies at all. They're at the Rams, they're at the Jets, they're home against the 49ers, and the final game of the season is against the Cowboys. But they're going to get plenty of rest for that stretch because after they play the Giants on the 19th, they go to Dallas for the Thanksgiving game. So that's the 23rd. Then they get 10 days off before they play a home game against Miami, and Miami doesn't look beatable at all. They're an offensive machine right now. They're fun to watch. They're scoring points. Okay, but then after that, you don't play again until December 17th. So if you look at the calendar here, they play November 23rd at Dallas, and then they play again December 17th, and in between that, there's only one game. So in a basically a 1 month period, they're playing 2 games. Not bad. And then, Jets, 49ers, Cowboys to finish, and that might be where the season is decided whether or not they make the playoffs. But, it's just interesting how you look at the schedule when it comes out and you make your predictions for wins and losses, and then you get to this point in the year, which is still early. We're only 6 games in, And the teams that you thought they were either definitely going to lose to or definitely going to beat look totally different right now. And, just like the first 6 games of the year, 3-3 seemed to make all the sense in the world. But I didn't think that they would win at Denver, and I didn't think they would lose to the Bears. And the opposite happened. Buffalo here, that didn't look winnable. Yes, they won at Philadelphia last year, but I didn't think they'd do it again. And then beating the Falcons. So it looks, pretty much like we thought it would look. It's just rolling out in a different way. And we'll find out what happens in the upcoming weeks. As we say in our business, we'll have to see how it all plays out. All right, some college football. And I heard my friend Kevin Sheehan talking about this. I think it's a great point. Maryland was up, not this past Saturday, but the previous Saturday at Ohio State, 10-0. They were in position to win that game if everything went perfectly, which it didn't. And what happens against a superior opponent like that is Maryland may be able to hang in there for a while because maybe their top 15 players match up favorably with Ohio State's top 15. But then when you get to the next 50 guys, they're not in the same ballpark. Ohio State is bringing in guys who are going to be NFL players who are not even playing right now. If you got NFL talent, you're playing for Maryland. And over the course of the game, you get worn down and, things start to fall apart for you late in the game. So there was that. Now, this past Saturday, they had the homecoming game against Illinois. And Illinois looked like a mess. They hadn't won a Big Ten game yet, and they had not played well. They had a bunch of injuries. And this was a game where Maryland could look at it and say, okay, we put the Ohio State game behind us, and we take it out on an inferior opponent. Well, they didn't, and they wound up losing on a field goal at the gun. Caleb Griffin, 43-yard field goal. I guess you can't say gun anymore. Final whistle, however they marked the end of the game. They lost the game 27-24. And Mike Locksley had warned about this. He said, this is a team that's going to come in here and you're going to play hard. And just like the old Pogo cartoon, we have met the enemy and it is us. And that was basically the message that Locksley had after losing on Saturday.
What happened today had very few things to do with Illinois. It goes back to what I always say, it's going to be us versus us. And we didn't play very well in any of the 3 phases. Offensively, to not score there before the half, to be inefficient on 3rd down, not come away with touchdowns when we got into the red area. Defensively, gave up too many explosive plays there at the end. And then special teams, kept providing momentum for the other team with the returns that we had. So our standard doesn't change when we win or when we lose. It stays and remains the same. And, obviously we got a bye week looking at us this week to get some guys healthy back out there, guys that we need, while also taking a look at all the things we do offensively, defensively, special teams, quality control it, and get this thing back on track and back in rhythm. This thing starts and ends with me as the leader. I've got to have our team prepared to go play. We don't make excuses. We did not play to our standard, and it's frustrating to watch because I still have a lot of faith and belief in this team. And as I just told them, the adversity that we find ourselves in today, we put ourselves there. So the only people that can get us out of it is us. And we'll use this next week to just evaluate every part of our program like we would always do during the bye week. And then obviously, like I said, get some guys healthy in turn to get us ready to go to Chicago and play Northwestern in a couple of weeks. I still got a lot of faith in this team. Still a lot of football left to be played. All of our goals are still ahead of us, but we've made it a little more difficult for ourselves, and we've got to do the work that's necessary to get us going back in the right direction.
I don't know if all the goals are ahead of them. They got 5 regular season games left. They still need 1 more to get bowl eligible, which they will, I'm sure. I don't know what the line will be for Northwestern a week from Saturday. But just to put a bow on this whole Maryland discussion and what Kevin Sheehan was saying about had they beaten Ohio State, would that have been a seminal moment for Maryland football? Would we begin to talk about them the way they talk about some of the best college teams in the country? I mean, it would have been a monumental upset. The biggest upset, the biggest game win I remember, and you have to go back 40 years, They played number 3 North Carolina. Maryland was like 17 then. And it was Boomer Esiason. They knocked off North Carolina, which number 3 in the country, in a Halloween game, late season game. And they tore down the goalposts. And I don't even remember the bowl that Maryland went to that year. It wasn't a New Year's Day bowl or anything like that. And that was a pretty big deal. Now, if they beat Ohio State, does that vault them ahead of the Commanders in conversation, what the Nationals are doing in the offseason, Capitals starting up, Ovechkin in the goal chase? No, this is not a college football town. But I think what is interesting, just looking at Twitter after this loss to Illinois, is that Mike Loxley's getting some heat and people are angry about the loss. And that's kind of like progress, because Maryland would lose games like this in the past, and people go, oh, yeah, Maryland football. Now, there seems to be a little bit more care about it, but even if they would have beaten Ohio State, Maryland, I think, is one of about 10 schools in the country where winning an NCAA basketball championship is bigger than a football championship. And it's not that way at most of the schools across the country. It's not that way at Ohio State if Ohio State were to win one. It's that way at Kentucky, I guess. It's that way at Duke. It's that way in North Carolina, I'm sure. But most schools across the country, football is bigger. If Alabama ever won an NCAA basketball tournament, people would say that's nice, but how are things going at spring practice? That's pretty much the way that works. And I guess Indiana would be a team that the basketball would be bigger than football, though they are a long way from being a football powers. They lost at Michigan 52-7 on Saturday. So looking at where Maryland football is on the landscape now, they have had in back-to-back weeks, hey, look at that. They're leading Ohio State at Ohio State to, really? They lost to Illinois? So, yeah. So we move on, and we got a full week to think about them before they go to Northwestern in a game that they should be favored. Northwestern, the big mess that they had with the firing of the coach and all the other mishigas that's going on in this program. All right, nationally, and this was surprising to me because I've watched Caleb Williams play, saw him play almost the entire Colorado game. Now, Colorado, they're coming back to earth. They're at home. They're at home against a really middling Stanford team. They're up 29-0 at the half, and they wound up losing that game in overtime. USC goes into Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's coming off a bad loss to Louisville, and now they're back home for this big traditional matchup with USC. They play every year since like the 1920s, and Notre Dame, which didn't look anywhere near as good as USC, they clobbered them. They clobbered him in this game. And in that game, Caleb Williams threw 3 interceptions. And so I wanted to play this. This is from Friday. This is before the weekend action. And the weekend action included Michael Penix Jr., who plays at Washington. He's got them now as a top 5 team. They pulled off a big upset of Oregon. North Carolina took care of business in beating a Miami team that probably is going to fall off the face of the earth because their idiot coach decided not to take a knee and lost the game the week before. But North Carolina took care of business. And so when on Friday, Ryan Leaf, who spends most of his time covering college football for Fox, was on with Dan Patrick. They talked about Heisman Trophy candidates, and with everybody on earth pretty much saying, oh, yeah, it looks like Caleb Williams is going to repeat. And Drake May, if things don't go well for Williams over the second half of the season, Drake May of North Carolina will probably win. Well, again, this is before Washington pulled the upset of Oregon. This is what Ryan Leaf said about the Heisman Trophy race.
My guy is Michael Penix Jr., so that's where we would
you take him over these other two?
Yeah, I'd take Penix over both of them.
If you had the number 1 pick in the draft,
yes,
you would take Michael Penix.
Yes, because of what Kalen DeBoer does offensively with Ryan Grubb. It's a very pro-style offense. Also, he doesn't get sacked. He gets the ball out of his hand, and that doesn't mean just quickly. Sometimes it's down the field for big shots quickly out of. He does not get sacked. the last 2 years, you look at what Caleb Williams has had to do. You're not going to be able to do that in the NFL, where you're going to be able to go backwards, run all over the place, and make a play. Now, maybe he will, but it hasn't been sustainable for a lot of guys. I mean, Patrick Mahomes uses it when he needs to. It seems like Caleb Williams has to do it all the time. I think Drake May is probably a good fit there as well in terms of what he can do. But I think he's a lot like Sam Howell. I do. I think they're very similar, just not only because they're from North Carolina. Michael Penix Jr. for me, and this is hard for me to say, being a Washington Husky, rocking a Coug shirt on your show here. But I just like him a lot, and I love what Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb bring to the table in terms of their offensive philosophy and what it can look like when it translates to the NFL game.
I like that. Okay. Because I agree with you. Caleb Williams won't be able to play this way in the NFL.
No.
He may have moments, plays that he can play like this, but, the game is just so much quicker, as you know, getting ball out, your reads when you throw it away, all of those things. But Orlovsky loved Drake May.
I haven't studied him enough. I've been breaking down a little bit of what the Miami-UNC matchup is for this weekend, just because of what went down with Miami last week, because I wanted this game to be such a big deal. And last week's decision by Mario Cristobal kind of put that to the side a little bit, and hopefully it won't beat him twice. So I think this will go a long way for Drake May if he can have a really good game against the likes of the Miami Hurricanes in a division or in a conference. And then, hopefully they'll get to a championship game against Florida State, who's really good.
Now, May and the Tar Heels did take care of business against Miami. But what Ryan Leaf said about Penix was prescient. That and look, I saw him play probably more than I normally would, because he played at Indiana, and Indiana was pretty decent for a while. My son went to Indiana, loves Indiana basketball, so we'll watch some of their games. And Penix was always getting hurt there. Well, he winds up at a place now where he can be protected and a place that can win, and he's got Washington back in the spotlight, and, we still got 5 games to go for most teams, 6, and then, I guess the Heisman voting is done before even the conference championship games. But I think that right now, Penix, who nobody was talking about 2-3 weeks ago, he might have taken the lead for the Heisman Trophy. A lot has to, unfold over the next month and a half of the season. But I thought that was some really good insight from Ryan Leaf, who, by the way, has been to hell and back. If you haven't followed his story, after being an NFL bust, he's been to jail a couple of times. He's had drug addictions, but has turned it around and become a really good analyst, and one who's gotten himself in a little bit of hot water lately, because you remember this is a few weeks ago as we're looking at the end of the Pac-12, and you had the 2 teams that are left there. You have Washington State and Oregon State playing, and the game day crew had a good chuckle about the matchup, and Ryan Leaf jumped in and defended his alma mater and defended the game. And now there's this big back and forth going between Game Day and Ryan Leaf, which he described to Dan Patrick on his show Friday.
I took the high road on that thing. I said, hey, I didn't like that you didn't celebrate our team, and rather than made it a joke. That was the only thing I said. I love Game Day. I love Kirk Herbstreit. But
I thought they were jabbing the Pac-12, not Washington State. Coach Corso is so pro college football.
I know.
From the standpoint, he doesn't say negative things. I'm watching that live, and I thought he said the Nobody Wants Us Bowl.
He does.
No, he says nobody watch.
He says nobody wants us bowl.
I think he says nobody watches. And maybe
it was the other way.
Okay.
I think Dickert heard no one watches us bowl, and what he really said was no one wants us bowl, because no one wants those 2 teams.
Okay, so factually he's correct.
He's correct.
Okay.
But what he did afterward, and the crying, and then McAfee kind of jumping on that.
Okay.
I didn't like that part. I just, it was my alma mater. These kids didn't even be made fun of. You had a chance to celebrate them, so I said something.
Do you want a piece of McAfee?
No, I don't. As my wife has told me over and over, stay away from that. That is bad karma. And she's right. She's right. She's absolutely right.
Let's bring in Pat McAfee, Paulie. Hey, Pat
McAfee. I just wanted to celebrate college football, and unfortunately, but they doubled down on it too. So I've let them kind of run with it, and
yeah, they're not letting go.
No, and unfortunately, that's I love college college football games. You know, I love doing that, and you know, that's the disappointing part in all this.
Okay, so but it creates attention. I think that the game day is a tremendous show, and that was just an unfortunate thing. I don't think it was Lee Corso's intention in any way to make fun of those two schools. That's I think Patrick's 100% right. He loves college football, and he's not going to go down that road. But it created a bit of a kerfuffle, as we say.